to welcome you to today's webinar, Acing the Interview. I'm going to hand things over to our featured presenter today. He is recruiting specialist and corporate hiring consultant, Mr. Gary O'Neill. Gary, you now have the floor.
Thanks. Hey, everybody, it's Gary. Thanks, Kelly. Appreciate all of that. So welcome to Hire Factor's headquarters, world headquarters, that is. So my name is Gary O'Neill. I am a corporate recruiting consultant. I run recruiting teams. I teach interviewing, and every single day I conduct interviews, and that's a big part of what I do. In fact, one of the things I wanted to show you is, let me drag my calendar onto the screen. So with the exception of this area up here, everything that you see either in orange or in green are either interviews that I'm conducting or interviews that hiring managers or my clients are conducting, and then I'm following up with hiring managers, interviewers, and the candidates after those calls. So I show you that just because it's kind of like, hey, here's one view into a recruiter's life when we're really busy doing all kind of stuff. And so my point of view really is that I see hiring managers conduct interviews and all kinds of interviewers. I conduct them all the time. And so I'm here to share with you as much as I can in the time that we have, the kinds of things that you can do to ace your interview. Now, my deal always is kind of taking you behind the scenes, not sugarcoating anything. And the approach always is that everything great that happens, every hire that happens at the front of the line. So it's really all about getting to the front of the line, and each interview is simply a little step on your way to being at the front of the line. And there's no ideal way ever for your resume, for your interviews, for anybody. But what we try to do is since we know the behaviors of people who are junior recruiters, through interviewers, through technical interviewers, through the rest, if we can come up with the things I'm here to share with you, the things that are kind of common across all of those, and the ways that that you can put your best foot forward, and that's what we're here to do. So let me move my schedule. See, I've even got some this afternoon. It's all good. So here's the handout that's in front of you. We'll be going through this, and I have this because rather than like a PowerPoint presentation, hopefully this will be a resource to you afterwards. So here's the deal. This is what we're really going to talk about. We'll do a brief intro, just talking about some things in general about really why organizations are hiring, why hiring managers are hiring, what everyone is thinking along the way, and how you can position yourself for the problem. And we'll talk about kind of the objectives of an interview. But then I really think about it in three pieces, which is, what do you do to prepare before your interview? What do you do to perform during your interview? And what do you do to progress your way forward? So we got 3 Ps. What do you call that? That's not an onomatopoeia, but that's I don't know, it's a linguistic thing, right? So we got the 3 Ps: prepare, perform, and progress. And the secret in all of these is the preparation. It's really the preparation is the big part of it. Everything else goes easier. So I thought I'd also share with you that I counted yesterday in the interviews that I did, and I know in general, the way that I start an interview is to say, hey, thanks so much for your time, a little bit of chit chat. Hey, what I thought we'd do to frame our conversations, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am, where I fit in the scheme of things. We'll talk a little bit about the company, whatever company that happens to be. And then, and so that's kind of how I'll open things up. And then after that, it's about, hey, does that make sense? And I say, okay, cool. Well, I don't want to waste your time telling you all kinds of things you already know. Did you have a chance to check out our company, our organization at all? And the typical answer I get is, no, no, not really. I haven't had time, right? Okay, that's kind of interesting to me, right? That usually, since the majority of people do that, I guess it isn't a huge knock against someone, but that's the beginning of success in an interview, which is being really, really well prepared. I can tell you the story of another gentleman. I don't think he'd mind me using his name. His name's Kyle, and he's a database administrator who just took a role with a really cool company here in town that I'm working with. And one of the things that through the entire interview process, not only was I impressed by, but a lot of the interviewers and the hiring manager along the way, unprompted for me, told me about how well prepared he was. And he was. When I talked to him and I asked him that question, he started off with, oh, well, you guys, some of your customers are these, and this is what you do, and here's who the leader is of the team that I'd be working on. And it's just like, all right, right there, it's kind of go, hey, all I need to know is where to send your offer, right? And when can you start? So your preparation for an interview, it won't always go like that. But my point is that most people are not prepared at all. I don't think, in many ways. And so by preparing at all, you set yourself apart. And then it's, pardon me, it's so easy to do that. Then why not kind of take it all the way? So let's do that. All right. All right. So let's go. So here's the deal. The 1.1, it says it's all about the problem. But here's the thing. Like, no company hires anyone unless they have a problem solved. So one of my clients' problems, I'm frozen. Hey, Kelly, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. We lost you on webcam, but now you're back.
Okay, cool. So yeah, so I've been having I just switched over to a new cable internet service. It's actually pretty good, but I have a little spottiness here and there. So hang tight. If something happens, I will be right back. So here's the deal. No company hires anyone unless they have a problem to be solved. So one of my clients' problems right now is that they're about to re-architect their entire network to move a lot of their compute power and their storage power from their own data centers into the cloud, probably Google, and they're going to have to refactor and reform all of their network. They don't have anybody on their team who can do that. So their problem is that they're about to start in this major re-architecture, and they don't have a network engineer who's strong enough to actually do that kind of architecture for a global network that carries, it's like $500 billion in retail sales. So it's kind of a big deal. So that's their problem. But then you got to think about the fact that the hiring manager has a problem, right? The hiring manager in this particular case has the problem because he needs someone on his team to be able to do this work. But then prior to that, you come back to me, who's the recruiter, and there's some other people. My problem is that I not only have to identify the people, but interview the people and make sure that everyone he's going to talk to is going to be really well worth his time. And so my point in all of this is that if, when you're going through the interview process, if you consider what is the problem that every person you interact with, what is their problem, and you work to help them solve their problem, because ultimately when you get hired, that's what you're there to do, is to solve certain classes of problems. So that's what we're going to talk about. And if you focus on the problem that needs to be solved, and ultimately the problem is, why the job is open and why you'll be hired into the job. And usually the problem in that case is one step above, if you will, the actual work that you do or the tasks that you perform. So if you were going into, say, a IT support role, and you're going to be imaging computers and setting them up for new employees. You'll be answering all kinds of questions that range from, I can't print, to all of those kinds of things, as well as handling Active Directory and their backups, and kind of a full-fledged role for a small company. The real problem, if you're going to join that, is that they want to keep users productive, and the real problem is that they want to make sure that IT is an asset for the company. And so those are the real kinds of problems. So ultimately, if you can understand, why you perform the task you're going to be performed, and as a result of that, what problems are you solving, then things will go phenomenally well for you, because very few people kind of really think that through. All right, I hope that makes sense. My point is, it's really all about the problem. It's about the problem that you're going to solve when you're hired. And then through the interview process, it's about helping each one of those individuals solve the problems that they have, right? And the problems that they have are, early stage interviewers who's doing a phone screen. Their problem is they have a bunch of people at phone screen. They need to narrow it down to 3 to 5 to move forward to the next step. And the problem is they want the person at the next step to go, hey, this is a really great set of candidates. It was really worth my time talking to them. So that's the problem in that case. This item here at the top of the screen right there, 5 underlying interview questions. What I have found over many years of doing this, about 18 now professionally, and watching tens of thousands of interviews happen. I don't know, I've never counted how many interviews, probably 15,000 hires, so that would be 100,000 interviews, maybe more. It's crazy. But in watching all of these people interview and seeing the feedback, I think it really comes down to, these are the 5 underlying interview questions that people really want to know. Is, who are you? What problems can you solve? Do you understand how, by solving those problems, that you help me and my business? And do you have proof that you could do that? And is it worth considering you further? And I doubt very many of the interviewers, if any, that you run into will specifically think about these questions. But I believe that if in your resume and if in your interview, you go out of your way to try, one, to be prepared to answer those questions, but then to, through the course of the conversation and the interview, end up answering these questions. I think that it's critical. And in the third one, what problems can you solve is kind of what tasks, what are your skills, what are your experience, right? And then, can you help me in my business is one that I don't think that people think about enough. And there's an individual who is going to make the decision to hire you. That's the person who's referred to as the hiring manager, right? There isn't really a title hiring manager. It's that when a manager over a department is hiring someone, then they're the hiring manager in that moment. But the hiring manager has a problem. Sometimes the problem is they can't sleep at night. Sometimes their problem is that, they have all kinds of problems in terms of maybe they're not going to get their bonus. Maybe, this job has been open too long. Maybe somebody just quit. Maybe, and so that individual has some kind of a problem that they would really love to hire someone so that they can feel better about everything. And then they ultimately have a business problem, which is the reason why they have the authority to make the hire. And by hiring you, they're going to feel better and this problem is going to be solved. So understanding how you help that individual and how you help the company by doing what you do will set you apart if you're able to articulate that, because very few people can, honestly, or do. Do you have proof is the part where certifications can be really handy, particularly if you're in career transition, because the idea is that you can talk a good game, but at the end of the day, as the hiring manager, hiring another person is about the most risky thing that you can do. Because if you make a great hire, they can make your life so much better. You can get raises, you can get promotions. I mean, all kinds of great things happen when you hire a great team. And of course, now you got to lead them and all that, but it starts with hiring the right people. So most hiring managers don't. Most of the hiring managers I work with, and Kelly, can you still hear me? But most of the,
Yes, we can.
okay, cool. About the
Your
sound
webcam
change.
just paused for a second.
Okay, cool. I'll just keep going when it does it. Something about the sound changes in my ear when it does that, so I can't tell. Um, so the idea of, do you have proof? It's a risky proposition to hire you. And so now I want to know, can you really do what it is that you say that you can do? And that's where certifications, that's where, the ability to, show your motivation, your drive, as well as your ability to get things done will make all the difference. All right, so we're about to jump into the section where I actually show you and talk to you about how to prepare. This is just kind of the undercurrent of everything that I'm thinking about, which is interviewing is a series of steps. It's not just one big decision. You getting hired there's a lot of people along the line, and sometimes that first person in the line doesn't really understand the job and can't really have that meaningful of a conversation with you. But what their problem is that they have a number of people to talk to. They need to narrow it down to a set of people, and you can have a significant impact on the decision that they make as to whether you move forward or not, because it's all about whether or not you're going to be easy to work with and whether or not you're going to make them look good, quite frankly. All right, so it's pretty clear, right? Item 1.2 here, objectives of your interview is really connect with the other person. I mean, like, really connect with them, because at the end of the day, it's all about, do you really care that you're helping this other person and that you're helping solve their problem and some of their team? So, that underlying connection is critical. You're going to discuss the problem, right? The work that you're going to do, and ultimately, the how things are better for the organization and for others because of the work that you do. And a lot of times you won't be asked that, but if you know that that's really what you're there to do, you can find ways to bring it up in the conversation sometime. And the goal of every single interview is just to get to the next step. I mean, there will come a point where it's a final interview. You may not even know it's a final interview, but there will come a point where the next step is to get an offer. But otherwise, the whole objective of each interview is simply to get to the next step. And I'll make a quick comment on that, which is, I think that I talk to far too many people who in their first interview, because oftentimes for the roles that I'm working on, I'm the first person who they talk to. And a lot of times people are jumping all the way to the end game, which is getting an offer. And, sometimes people want to know, they want to know all kinds of things. So my point in that is that if you really understand that in every single one of your interviews, your objective is to get to the next step, then things will go a lot better for you. So a simple example of that is that you'll be curious about all kinds of things. You might be curious about compensation. You might be curious about benefits. You might be curious about those kinds of things that are put into the category of what's in it for you, right? So those things might be, on your top of your mind. And it's really usual that, or I shouldn't say, it's certainly not unusual at all that when I get to the point in an interview where I'm kind of handing it over and saying, hey, so, I'm here as a resource to you. What questions might you have or what have you, that people will go to, well, how much does it pay? And do they have a 401k? And what about their healthcare benefits and stuff like that? So my point is that there's nothing wrong with asking those questions, but you lost a real opportunity. And that every step in your interview process is to get to the next step. Then every word that comes out of your mouth and every thought that you share, you probably ought to focus on making sure that those things that you're saying and asking are going to make the other person more interested in you and feel better about moving you forward to the next step. So despite the fact that there isn't anything quote unquote wrong with asking about, say, compensation or what have you, there's nothing about asking about compensation or asking about time off or asking about benefits. Or there's nothing about you asking me those kinds of questions that makes me like you more. So why not take the opportunity, this rare opportunity to connect with another person and make sure that you're always having conversations with them that are going to help them make sure that they like you more and want to move forward with you. Now, the time will certainly come when it makes sense to have those conversations, but the first interview isn't that. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about how to, by the way, I don't know if anybody's got any questions or comments or whatever, I'm about to shift over and what we're going to talk about is really how to go properly prepare for your interview. But before we do that, Kelly, anybody got anything to ask or anything to say or anything before we move on?
Yeah, no, we do have a couple questions, but I think
Sure.
you're going to address these later on. So I
Okay,
think we
cool.
can go ahead and move on for now, and I've got them in the queue just in case you don't address them for some reason, and we can go ahead and ask them at that time.
Okay, perfect. I do want to say one more thing, and I probably ought to add this to this, which is this life cycle of steps through the interview process. Um, the other thing that's important is there's information that you want to gather along the way, like compensation, benefits, and work hours and work environment, and all those things. There's things that you need to understand and gather along the way. And then there's information that you have to provide along the way or that you want to provide along the way. And that people will ask you sometimes, but there will be things that people won't ask you about that if it's important, you want to make sure you get it on the table. But my point is that over that life cycle, you also need to think about when's the best time to bring those things up. So as an example, if you have a situation that may make you less desirable than some other candidates, as an example, maybe you have a special case where every Wednesday and Thursday you have to leave the office early so that you can go pick up your kid, do something like that, right? Let's just say that it's something that you just have to do. Well, there's no reason to bring that up in the very first interview, because if you bring things like that up in the first interview, then just know that a lot of the people who are doing the first interviews aren't necessarily people like, but I shouldn't say that. It's not about not being people like me. It's that they're going to be junior people who are just kind of going through a list, and they're often looking for a reason to not move forward with you. And that's just the truth. And so if someone is in the mode of trying to screen out rather than screen in by saying, oh, and by the way, I just want to let you know on Wednesday and Thursday afternoons, I'm going to have to leave by 3 because I got to pick up my kid and blah, blah, blah. And you tell them all this stuff you probably shouldn't be telling them anyway. But my point is that you just gave them a reason to decline you out of the process because they're looking for a way to get this set of people down to this set of people. And so my point is, don't give them that thing. Now, as you move through the interview process and as you get closer to an offer, it's certainly important to bring those kinds of things up because it is important at that point in time. And if they've fallen in love with you and if they really want to work with you along the way, then something that would have been a showstopper in the first conversation turns into a conversation with the hiring manager. So, oh, well, that's fine. I mean, that's no big deal. We have a pretty flexible schedule and the rest. So, just be aware of the fact that I understand that you want to make sure that you are understood, that people understand about you, and that you want to be able to tell the truth and the whole truth and nothing but the truth. The truth is that it's all about the truth, nothing but the truth, but the whole truth comes out over some period of time, and you want to order that right. Okay, that's all I got to say about that. So let's talk about preparation. So I've got kind of a step-by-step process, and the thing that I'd also like to share with you about this is that I work with a lot of clients. I close business, I do sales. So this is, if I'm going to meet with a new company, so I'm working with a company, Revionics in Austin. The first person who I met there was the chief technology officer. And so what I did, pardon me, what I did in preparation for that meeting is essentially exactly this. And so, yeah. So my suggestion to you in preparing is, first of all, really understand the company. I can't tell, at least 80% of the interviews that I conduct, I'm going to record sometime and get somebody's permission ahead of time and serve you a few sound bites of, hey, so I'm just curious, what do you know about our company? You have a chance to check us out or anything? No, not really. Okay, right. So you care so much about your career that you don't necessarily care at all to learn anything about us and who we are, right? That's what runs through my head. And so just know that this whole interview process and even reviewing your resume and the rest isn't one big decision to hire you. It's a whole series of micro decisions. And if you've been in some of my other sessions, you heard me talk about these micro decisions. They have sound effects. One sound effect that comes with these micro decisions that people are making during the course of an interview, one sound effect is, oh, yeah, great, right? That kind of sound. And the other one is, yeah, really? So you want to make sure that you stay in the other camp. So it's, as soon as I kind of go there, imagine that you're me. Imagine you're interviewing someone and they say, well, no, I hadn't really had a chance to do that. Yeah, not so good. Instead, here's what you want to do. In front of you on this kind of handout, this is the outline of really what I do when I'm preparing for a meeting with a new client. And the idea is that it's to answer the question, so what do you know about our company? And you want to be able to do that in like 2 minutes or less. And my suggestion is to you that you literally write down a one-page company summary. And I should show you this too. I don't have it, but literally I write it down because something about the act of it going through my eyeballs or whatever it is and into my head and out through my hand and writing it down, I can refer to it, is more meaningful for me than typing it, but type it if you want to. But here's the outline that I use, and you might want to use something similar to it. So it goes like this, and this is a hypothetical one that I made up, but it's company name helps these kinds of clients solve these kinds of problems. Company name helps these kinds of clients solve these kinds of problems. So in this particular case, it's Retail Online Solutions helps small to medium online retailers drive targeted traffic to their client's website and convert the traffic into sales. So I'm going to go through this outline really quickly and kind of show you this outline. And then I'm going to show you literally how to go find this information. And you would think that you could just go to a company's About Us page and gather that, but probably not. If you take we're going to use LinkedIn, we're going to use their company website, we're going to use a couple of things to kind of come up with this story, right? So the story is this company helps these kinds of customers or these kinds of clients or these kind of whoever solve this kind of problem. Then you kind of go into their products and services include these, whatever their products and services are, it's usually going to be pretty clear on their website what products and services they offer. The next step is a key differentiator. What makes them different from their competitors? A key differentiator is this, right? Ideal clients are, and that sometimes comes from their website or wherever it is, you can kind of see who they currently work with, or you can imagine who they work with. And then if you can find something about it, people describe the company culture as those kinds of things. I'm not a huge fan of Glassdoor, and I'll tell you why later. But that's one of those places where you can go find some of that information you can find in the news. All right. So let's talk about how to do that. Let me show you how to do that. So my favorite place to go do this may or may not come as a surprise to you. I got to bring my, here it is. Come on, browser. There we go. My favorite place to go get that level of company information is in LinkedIn. Most companies have a LinkedIn page, and so what we're going to do is that we're going to go to this page, and come on, the network is running a little slow, and I'm going to go look up a company, right? One of my clients, and I haven't been to their LinkedIn page before. Well, it's been a while since I've been there, so hopefully it's going to say something. Russell Johnson's he's the guy who just hired the database administrator. So hold on one second. So one way to get to a company page is just search for it. You can find somebody who works there and you just click it. So now we're going to go to Revionics' page on LinkedIn. And the reason why I like the company page on LinkedIn is this about click right there, is that they're only given about this much space by LinkedIn to have their overview. So they're put inside of a box, and that box is about the right size. And a lot of times, all of the information that you need is right there. So let's just check it out. So Revionics is a global SaaS provider of science-based pricing, promotion, space, and competitive insights for innovative retailers. Look at that. There's your first sentence. Now, I would probably convert that into my own words, so I'd be able to like spit it out and say something. So I got some more digging to do, but there's the starting point. How about this? I promise you that this is amazing, man. I promise you I didn't really go, I looked at this before I met with the CTO, but it's, look at this, it kind of fits the profile. Revionics helps retailers around the world. What does it help them do? Gain a competitive edge by managing and optimizing pricing, promotions, markdown, and space. A little repetitive, but that's what they do. Created by retail experts, blah, blah, blah. So this is a really great way. And for most companies of any size, they actually spent some time and energy to write that down. And my challenge to you is going into your interview, you need to be able to describe the company in 1 to 2 minutes better than the person who you're interviewing with, right? Better than the person who you're interviewing with. So this is a great place to do it. There are a lot of other great places to do it, but revionics.com. Let's just go take a quick look. So, all right, so here are some of their clients. Check this out. So I got another big piece of what they do. Apotech, I bet that's over in the UK. BJ's, is that a grocery store chain? I think. Sally Beauty, Dick's Sporting Goods, Lowe's. That's not the Lowe's, although Lowe's, the lumber company, is one of their clients. That's not the right logo. Family Dollar, and Love's. So apparently, Walgreens and the Home Depot and others don't necessarily, I know those, but they don't, let's not let them put them on there. Sorry. So then I'm going to go, so now I know some of their clients are, go to their company page. I can find some more about that. And, and then I can come up here, I can look at their segments, I can look at their solutions, and pretty easily come up with something that fits this, which is company name helps these clients solve this problem. Their products and services include these kinds of things. What makes them different from their competitors is this. Their ideal clients are these. Examples include those. And people describe the company as. Okay, cool. So there's a number of places where you can get that kind of information. So one is my favorite. Sometimes there's nothing there, but you need to go look. I'm going to go to, I'm just doing a Google search on Revionics, and I'm going to go to news. And so what I'll do is I'll check out all the news about them, right? So that's one way to go do that. And you can find some current events and the rest. You can look at their regular searches. The other thing that you can certainly do is you can go to YouTube. This is the series of stuff that I go to, right? I go to their LinkedIn page first. I go to their company website next. I then go do some searching to see if I can find some news on them. Then I go to YouTube, Revionics. Oh, look at that. I knew that they had a channel. So, and now I've got this whole series of videos. And if I spend a little bit of time here, I would find this one. And this one answers this question.
Offers that reach customers where they're most likely to respond to ongoing promotions.
So, you know what? You probably ought to be able to mention the fact that, hey, you guys got a YouTube channel with about 45 videos there. The person you're interviewing with is going to go, we do? Yeah, you do. In fact, there's one of them that's really pretty good. Would you like me to send you the link? Yeah. So see, this stuff really does matter. One final place that I want to talk to you just a little bit about, Glassdoor. So first, a word of caution. I'm not a big fan, clear for full disclosure. And here's the reason why, is that I know companies really well who have not great Glassdoor ratings. And they're sometimes because I've known them to let go of some really bad people who are committing felonies in their organization who subsequently wrote horrible reviews. I know more companies that the challenge problem is that their marketing manager or somebody else gets paid bonuses based upon their ranking, and somehow magically a bunch of scores set up. And sometimes it's pizza parties, or sometimes it's them writing them themselves, or you can hire companies to go write them for you, and you can hire services that will regularly, at whatever pace you want, whatever size, write reviews for you. So take the information on Glassdoor with a big grain of salt. And the other thing to understand is that the smallest package that a company can, so a company can't change their profile, they can't edit their profile, they can't edit anything, information about their company, nor can they reply to anything that anyone says unless they sign up for a subscription. And the least expensive subscription that they can sign up for is $6,000 a year. So know for some of the smaller companies, what's going on inside of the company is they're kind of going, oh my God, they even have our old logo and stuff up there. I wonder whether they did it on purpose. But yeah, but we're not spending $6,000, right? We're not doing that. So with that said, you can certainly go find some information about companies here. And sometimes, you know, just take it with a really big grain of salt. And the other thing to be careful with is I had someone recently telling me something about one of the clients I was calling about. She said, you know, it looks like, you know, that no one who's there has worked there for more than about a year, and that gives me concern. I was like, well, why? So, well, because they have a lot of turnover. It's like, no, they don't have any turnover at all. The reason why half the people have worked there for less than half a year is they've doubled in size in the last year. So be careful with the information that you go gather online. Yeah, just do. All right, so that's it. So step number one really is really understand the company at a level far beyond what you think you might be responsible for. Because here's what the deal is. You're talking about your career. You're not just talking about this job. Like, take into account from now until the time that you expect to no longer be wanting to earn income. And there's a curve there, and under that curve is your total earnings. And all I know is if you do a great job at it, and you get yourself in front of the right companies, and you really knock it out of the park with respect to a great interview, you can easily add thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars to the offer that they're going to make to you, which compounds over the rest of that whole period of time. And what sets people apart is their ability, their interview ability really sets them apart. I have two candidates right now in play for a position. The team, they're not super skilled interviewers, and right now they're really impressed by an individual who, let's just say one person's significantly more expensive than the other. They're leaning heavily that way, and a big part of the reason why is that how they behaved and what they knew in the interview process has had such an impact that two people who would otherwise be considered very equivalent, they're considering about a 30% higher comp because of their, essentially, the other individual's ability to do this kind of stuff. And I'm not second guessing that at all. I'm just telling you how powerful this is. So it's not just, it's about how much that person gets paid. Cool. So first, understand the company. And you can go on. So it's these first five are really the key, or however many of these are. But you could go on and find out their location and size. You could find out about current events for them. You could find out about the history of the company, and you can even find out about the leadership of the company, depending upon the level of the role that you're interviewing with. This, you know, may or may not. So, it's so easy to know more about the company than the person who you're interviewing with, that you need to do that, and you should do that. And it's so important that I make my living because people get hired. And I go out of my way to make sure that for certain positions that I work with the people, my candidates, so that they're properly prepared to go have this conversation, because when I do that, my chances of getting paid goes up significantly. So that means that if you do this, then your chances of getting hired go up significantly. All right. So item number 2, right? So now we know all about the company. Item number 2 is what I call define the problem. And what I mean by define the problem is that when there is a job that is posted somewhere, or I've given the job description to the candidate, we'll sometimes have a conversation about that. So tell me about that. What do you understand about this role? Where have you done similar kinds of roles? Tell me a little bit about you and your profession, and the rest. And so rarely are people very well prepared to have that conversation either. And one of the things that is most impressive to me and to hiring managers and others that I see, one of the things that most often helps people get to the next step is their ability to really understand the problem prior to the interview. And what I mean by that is, if you have a job description, go through it, right, in detail, not only just line by line. Take it with a grain of salt, because usually what's in a job description is, it's a laundry list of stuff. They're rarely going to hire somebody with that laundry list of stuff for the money that they want to pay. So usually somebody has to settle. So don't worry too much about the entire laundry list. You just got to cover quite a bit of it, but it's not everything. But what's even more important is that, why do they want, so a job description usually has a list of tasks that are going to be performed and responsibilities and requirements, right? Well, why is it that the company wants somebody with these skills and to perform these tasks with these kinds of requirements? What's the outcome of someone who does that? So the problem, item there, 2.2.1, an open position means that there is a need, there is a problem, and you can define the likely problems and be prepared to address them. So if you have a job description and it's talking, and it's with I've used this one before, but it's a car dealership, let's say, and you're going in to interview it kind of at the corporate level, and you looked ahead of time and you saw that they actually own 5 different car dealerships, 2 in, Austin, 2 in Dallas, and 2 in Houston, let's say. I said 5, but there's 6. Anyways, there's 6 apparently. And you're going to interview for an IT role. And on that IT job description, it talks about end user support. It talks about Active Directory and the skills. It talks about network attached storage. It talks about BYOD, bring your own devices. So now you kind of go, all right, so I'm going to interview for an IT role at a automobile retailer who has 6 different locations. So now, and they have BYOD and those things that I described, and one of them is a Toyota dealership, one's a Ford or what have you, kind of go, wait a second. I bet they have totally different parts keeping and parts ordering systems for Toyota than they do for Ford, than they do for General Motors, than they do that. They probably have totally different financing systems. They probably have people in the service department as well as people who are out selling automobiles on handheld devices. Some of them are probably their own personal mobile phones. We have 6 different remote locations, so there's a network between those, and if all kinds of transactions from the point of sale to contracts and the rest are going to go over that network. And the users are like this is the number of employees they have. You can go search for them. You can use LinkedIn and find out how many employees they have. Now you can imagine what that IT network engineer job is all about. So you got to make sure that all those dealerships are up and running. So at least part of the team has to. That they're probably using SSL tunnels or some kind of a VPN between their different. So you can begin to visualize what's going on. So read beyond the job description, combine the job description with what you know about the company, and now go in and understand that your job is to ensure that the salespeople and others with handheld devices are able to easily connect to their network. And you can have these conversations. Hey, if I'm in the interview, I can begin to say, you know what, I've been thinking about it, but You know, you guys have a Toyota dealership and a GM dealership. I bet they use totally different parts systems and ordering systems and everything else. You guys got to, you guys got to keep up with all of that. And they're like, yeah, we not only that, we got this thing over there. So the next thing you know, right, there's this conversation going, all because you took a shot at kind of understanding the deeper aspect of what the situation is and what the job is really about and what the problem is. Because the problem you're there to solve is never the list of tasks that you perform. Because when you're going to do this, you need Active Directory, you have to have these skills and all those kinds of things. Why is it that someone wants somebody to do those things with those skills and that experience? And imagine what that is. Particularly if you're in career transition or if you're in IT, so few people can do that. So if you have a clue, here's the deal. Somebody's going to pay you to do these things. If you understand the business results that you're creating as a result of doing those things, now you understand, and you understand that what they pay you has to be a fraction of what the work that you do is worth, and you can tie what you do to the value you bring to the business. Now you have all, now you have all kind of leverage too. Now you understand what compensation should be. Now you understand what, what the goals ought to be with respect to growth in the organization. We have another session that we call Keys to Career Advancement, where we're talking about all those kinds of things. But all right, back to this. So define the problem. So where you can get the information is take the job description, strike out things that don't look like problems, highlight action verbs. There's all kinds of stuff you can do with this. You can ask your recruiter, hey, tell me a little bit about it. Who am I meeting with? You can ask all kinds of stuff. You can Google for an old job description. You can review the LinkedIn profiles of the people who are currently working in the job. So whatever job you're interviewing for, go see if somebody else is in that job or has been in that job, or what does the team look like, and look at their backgrounds and do some homework so you can begin to figure out, hey, look, it looks like they hire people like this. I bet they have this kind of problem, right? And then conceptualize the possibilities, which is what I was doing just a while ago, which is with these car dealerships and this kind of situation, with this job, with those tasks and these background and that experience, I bet something like this is going on. And that means you'll be able to have a great connection, you'll be able to have a meaningful conversation, not just about your ability and your skill and all those kinds of things, but particularly if you're in career transition, that often means that the business maturity that you have to be able to get things done and accomplish things, add to that your new certifications or your new skills or what it is, and you have something that a lot of the other people competing for the same job don't have, which is earlier stage, more entry-like compensation expectations and new skills, along with a deeper understanding of how to work together as a team and to make things happen. So if you can combine those things together and put that into the context of the problem they're trying to solve, I think that things will go much better for you. So, Kelly, what do you think? Are you out there? I'm gonna just want to punt you the ball, but maybe somebody wants to hear somebody other than just my voice. Any questions, comments, anything going on out there?
Yeah, we do have a couple questions I wanted to ask you. So this person says that, they've traveled around the country and trained large groups on different various topics, but when they're in an interview, they freeze, wondering what the best answer is or who is their audience.
Sure.
And they're wanting to learn how to overcome this. Do you have any tips on that?
I think part of it really is to, I'm trying to think of a way I could tie it to large group presentations, because I kind of do that too. But here's the thing, is that if you go into these interviews understanding that it's not about you, it really isn't about you. It's really about your ability to solve problems and about your motivation to help that other person. And so it's not necessarily, and you take the burden off of yourself now of trying to figure out what is the best answer. And the best answer is, how you honestly feel about it, and to go in and have a conversation with someone, knowing that you're not there to get a job, that you're there to really discover whether or not you can help that other person. And so my hope would be, and that helps not just for that specific situation, but that's kind of my recommendation to everybody else. Take the burden off you. The interview isn't about you. I mean, how selfish almost, right? It's really not about you. It's really about your ability to solve the problem. And it ought to be just as important to you that the hiring manager or the people you're talking to hire the best person for the job. And that you would be behind that, even if it wasn't you. then things are going to miraculously, actually, things are going to go better. And maybe it helps relax a little bit, right? You're just there to, hey, I'm just here to have a conversation to see whether or not I can help you with have some of the problems that that you got right now. So I hope that's helpful, but that's that's kind of the thing that I think about that.
All right, and one more before we continue on. We had a few questions already come through on people making career changes, and I know you'll go over that. But this one in particular, they say they're making a career change with no hands-on experience at
Okay.
age 60. And they
Right.
have a degree and various classes from New Horizons. Thank you.
Sure.
And many of the employers also kind of fit in health issue questions and such.
Oh,
What's your best advice on this, and how can they get by this? I'm sorry, they say, oh, and they say they do have some health issues. So,
uh,
what's your best advice to them on either how to avoid this question or how to still get by with getting the job?
okay. So first thing, let's address experience just a little bit. So the first thing I always have to say about experience is that a lot of times people tie experience to being paid. And so just know that as you go through coursework and as you go through labs or as you go through getting certifications, you are learning things and you are gaining experience. I mean, you really are. And so this notion of experience is one where just first of all understand that you do have experience. It just might be the case that you didn't get paid to for your experience. So there's that. Um, the next thing is that if you're confident that what you've learned has infused you with the ability to solve these problems and that you can, anything that you don't know or understand, that you'll be able to learn and understand, then kind of you do have experience, right? You really do. It's just that the experience level you have is what it is, and that there are roles. I'm working on some right now where the experience level is really not all that great. And then I have another system engineer, administrator position. But the truth is on that one that unless someone has a reasonable amount of experience with respect to Active Directory, which would mean over the last few years, add, changing, deleting multiple departments and maybe user records, then they're not going to get that job. Or some true experience in what was the other thing? PowerShell scripting, right? So there are those roles. On the other hand, there are ones there they really just don't acquire any. So bottom line is that if the job really does require more experience, then as a recruiter, if I know that they need this level of experience, I won't move people forward who don't have at least that level of experience because I'm wasting everybody's time. So there's not a way to quote unquote get around that in any stretch. Now, with respect to be it health issues or any kind of situation or any kind of thing where you need accommodation, or and the accommodation could that I described earlier, which is I got to get off at 3 o'clock so I can pick up my kids, whatever it is. My suggestion always in those kinds of things is that go later in the interview. Once you're pretty sure that they're interested in working with you, and then you begin to kind of bring up those kinds of things. The other end of where it becomes inappropriate is you want to do it before there's an offer, because it's important to understand that the process of getting an offer is one where a lot of things have to get signed. It has to go in front of the CFO, has to go in front of the president, so signatures and approvals are going to happen. There was a lot of work that went in putting together the actual offer. And if it turns out that those things that you have are going to be a problem, you just really harmed the hiring manager and the recruiter and the rest, because the deal falls apart after it went in front of the CEO and the president, all those kinds of things, and it falls apart, right? So you want to make sure that if there's any of those kinds of things that might be a showstopper, that you get them on the table prior to the offer coming out, because yeah, that can cause a real problem. It's a lot harder to get somebody to go, oh, that's no big deal, to the deal falling apart. Hopefully that makes sense, right? So
Yeah.
that's what I think about those two things.
All right. And real quick before we move on, Gary, just one more.
Sure.
Someone had a great question on, you had mentioned doing researching the problem that the
Yeah.
company has before applying so that when you're in the interview, you can let them know how you can solve the problem. Would you
hmm
also recommend putting this into an application, cover letter, or resume? Or is that too much investment in time? And would you wait until the interview to do this?
So in general, I think that's probably going to be a real waste of your time. The only time I would do that is if I knew the communicating with was really a decision maker, maybe the hiring manager, and my investment in that time is going to go into the right person's hands. Because what happens is that at the beginning of most processes, if you're applying for a job online, which by the way, join us for effective job search strategies, and I'll tell you another way to go about it. I would probably never apply for a job online if I was looking for one, but we talk about that in another class. But my point is that the cover letter and stuff that you're usually sending in is going to an administrative assistant, and even worse, it's getting chewed up in an applicant tracking system that's AI driven and machine learning, and they do all this matching and stuff like that. So your chance of even getting considered, even getting your stuff getting looked at is really low if you're applying online and going through the traditional thing anyway. So in general, I wouldn't spend a whole lot of time on that. Yeah.
All right, let's go ahead and we can go ahead and go forward then.
Perfect. Cool. All right. So at this point in time, we know the company and we know the problem, and we've dug into the business a little bit. And when things are going to go really well for you is that my goal, if I was going into an interview, would be I'll know more about the company and I'll probably know more about the problem. It's just driving me crazy. You see my glasses are crooked, right? I see it right there. It's making me crazy. I know you probably won't even, if you hadn't noticed me adjusting my glasses before, you have now. So yeah. Anyway, so now we know the company. Now we know what the problem is. My goal is to know the company and to know the problem better than anyone else I'm going to interview with, at least until I get to the point where I'm getting to the founder of the company. So somewhere along the line, it drops off a little bit, but certainly early stage, I can. The third thing that you really want to know prior to going into your interview, and this is item number 2.3, and I think this is making me go a page at a time, is to know the interviewer, know who you're going to talk with. So I interview a lot of people. Really, really rarely has anybody done any homework on me, which is interesting to me. But at the same time, it really stands out when somebody says, hey, yeah, and in fact, it really stands out when prior to an interview, because a lot of times somebody else sets up interviews for me, that the candidate sends me a LinkedIn connection request. I'm like kind of going, hey, that was cool. That person's paying some attention. And then sometimes they say, hey, I see you run a company called Hire Factors. What's your relationship to Revionics? All right. It's kind of going, all right. So not only does it make it makes people feel good when you know something about them, when you seem to have actually cared, and it can make a significant difference as to how things go for you. So you want to know the interviewer. So you can look at their LinkedIn profile. A lot of people have one. If there isn't one, you need to know who you're interviewing with, and you need to pay some attention to it. If you're being set up generically for interviews, then whoever is setting those up, say, hey, who am I going to be interviewing with? It's important to me that I be able to put my best foot forward. So the onus is on you to make sure you know who you're going to be interviewing with. So ask. I mean, whoever's coordinating the interviews, they know. So make sure you know. And if you have the opportunity to talk with a recruiter or somebody who knows, it's odd to me that more people don't ask me. So how can I put my best foot forward? What's this interviewer's style? What do they really like? Are they short and sweet and direct and to the point, or do they like that? Or right? So go learn about the interviewer, and your recruiter or whoever's coordinating that is a real asset for you. So make sure you take advantage of that. So you can use LinkedIn, you can use people in your network, and your goal is and you can look at their team. So if they're a hiring manager and they're in IT, you can see who else is in IT. You can get a size of their team. you can see that maybe they recently hired 2 other people who are just like you. Hey, Dave, I see you hired 2 other people in this role in the last little while. Congratulations. Looks like your team is growing. So, please go do your homework. Go find the person and the people who you're interviewing with, and go at least one ring out and see who they're associated with, particularly inside of the work. Now, you can't tell for sure, and it doesn't matter how accurate your information is. The point is that in the interview process, it's always about getting to the next step. And a significant opportunity for you to get to the next step is to know the person who you're talking to, because they will like you better if you seem to know something about who they are. And even if you get it wrong, and even if you say, hey, Dave, it looks like you hired a couple of people in the last couple of months, right? I was looking on LinkedIn, Mary and James, right? They might say, no, they're not really on my team, but you just scored points because you bothered, right? You just scored points because you bothered. And in those sound effects of going through your interview, you just created the sound effect of somebody going, huh, oh, wow, okay, wow, that person bothered. So my promise, or what I know for sure, is that a gentleman named Kyle starts a significant move up in a database administrator role. He's got about 2.5 years worth of experience, in large part because he did his homework on the company and the problem and the people who he was interviewing with. And there's no question in my mind that that did him for him. I mean, that's what made all the difference. I'm not sure. I think he'll be the best hire because he is the person who bothered to go do that. He definitely was not the most technically strong, nor was he the most experienced, nor was he the least expensive. So that tells you something. All right, so go find out about the person. And even when you walk in their office, I've walked into office with people and I see that they have a Texas A&M and they have a University of Texas diplomas on the wall. And if you know anything about those 2 schools, there's a little bit of a rivalry. Texas A&M kind of doesn't like UT folks a whole lot, and UT folks don't pay any attention to Texas A&M folks. I'm more of a UT guy, by the way. But yeah, but you can kind of go in and say, hey, that's interesting. Which football games do you go to? Which one, the master's degree or bachelor's degree, And so even that, you can bring things up like that and know the person you're going to interview with best you can. Item 2.4. 2.4, your talent brand summary. This is your elevator pitch. This is know thyself, I guess is really what it is. So know the company, know the problem, know the interviewer, know thyself. And the objective is to be able to answer in case somebody says, so tell me a little bit about yourself. I rarely use that exact same phrase, but I say more or less the same thing, because even in the beginning of my interviews, it's like, hey, I thought what we do to frame our conversations, I'll tell you a little bit about me so you know who we're talking about, where I fit in the scheme of things. We're going to talk a little bit about the client. I'm going to take you on the inside a little bit so you can better understand the role that we're talking about. And then I really want to hear your story. I really want to hear about you. I want to hear about what makes you thrive. So that's the point at which you're going to tell me this and you're going to respond. And even if someone doesn't ask you that literally, knowing yourself well and being able to do this little exercise is going to help you. And realize that in an interview, a lot of you already do know this, but interview is really it's a conversation. So you're not just there to answer questions. And if nobody asks you the question, that you can't get information out, I mean, you're there to deliver certain information and you're there to gather certain information. And you need to understand what information you're there to deliver. So they're going to ask you questions for some of the information that they want to know. And some of that's going to be a surprise to you because you don't know what they're going to ask or what information they're gathering. There's others that you want to make sure that they have, and you make sure that you give them that. And one of them is this, your talent brand summary. So it goes like this. This is the shorthand version of it. But a great, to know your, I am a blank and a blank, which usually I fill in with a title, if you will. And if you're interviewing for a system administrator job, that's what they call it, literally, system administrator, then one of the things you do is you say, I am a system administrator. So I'm a system administrator and a certified IT security professional. I help these kinds of companies solve these kinds of problems using skills that include these. So it goes something like that, right? I'm a system administrator and a certified, and a certified IT professional with CompTIA A plus, Network plus, Security plus certifications. Which, by the way, if you're in career transition and you're moving into, I don't care whether it's IT or whatever it is, the value of the majority of the value of the certifications you get is because when you take the set of all people who are new to some role, and you take the set of all people who are certified, and you take the set of all people who aren't, great people in here. It's just that there will be no one who's certified who doesn't at least know a good deal that they're doing. So those certifications really reduce risk. So tell me about yourself. I'm a blank and a blank. I help busy IT leaders. What you want to be able to say is I help people just like you, but you can do it kind of transitively by saying, I'm an Microsoft system administrator and an IT security professional. These kinds of certifications. What I really love to do is I love to help end users make sure that they stay productive and that they get their questions answered and they feel like they were heard the very first time. I help people like you and the leaders know what's going on in the areas and know that I'm doing everything that I can to solve people's problems and to get things done quickly. And I help business by ensuring that users are productive, that IT assets are protected, and that we do everything that we can to ensure that the time and the effort and the money that the organization puts into IT returns multiple times what it is that our team costs and spends. All right, something like that. And then you can say, my skills include, this kind of stuff with Microsoft, this kind of stuff with Cisco, or whatever it happens to be, or the things that you've learned. A lot of those things are things that you will have pulled out of the job description or pulled out of the hiring manager's profile or pulled out of the profile in LinkedIn of the people who might work in that team, so that you can make sure that those ones that you really do know and experience, even if they were in the job description, you can drop them into those lists because you know that if those words are on the job description or in the profiles of the people who work on those teams, those are skills and tools and things that are going to resonate with that team of people and the person who you're talking with. A lot of their stuff and embed it in your own talent brand, and it'll work pretty well for you. All right. So the other thing to know about this whole idea of know thyself and be able to present yourself, I think it's in What Color Is Your Parachute? That's been around forever, but I think there's a phrase in there that says something along the lines of the ability to describe yourself in a way that's exciting and compelling to others is a fundamental job search skill. And I think that that's true. So also know that if somebody asks you, or there's a time when they're basically saying, so tell me about you, know that the answer isn't about you. It's really not about you. They're not, the missing part in the thing about tell me about yourself, the missing part that somebody isn't saying out loud is, so tell me about a little bit about yourself with respect to your ability to help me be successful in my job, and with respect to your ability to be able to do this work, and with your respect to your understanding of, by doing this work, how is that going to make a difference? I mean, that's what they're saying, but that's not what most people answer. So if I ask people this in an interview, I usually get one of two answers. One is people will say, well, I was a project manager over at XYZ company. I kept projects on projects and schedule on schedule and budget on budget and product on product and, made sure that what we did. And then before that, I was a project manager over at so-and-so and I kept projects on project and budget on budget. And then before that, so there's a couple of things wrong. One, I've tuned out a long time ago, just like you probably tuned out. But you're moving the wrong direction. You're moving in the past. As soon as you told me you were a project manager, you didn't have to tell me that you keep projects on projects and schedule and budget on budget. I mean, that's what project managers do. So the most common answer is, I was a such and such, and let me give you the job description of what it was that I did. Please don't. And the other answer I commonly get is, oh, well, I'm a really hard worker and I've got a strong work ethic and blah, blah, blah. And kind of these self-aggrandizing things. It's like, yeah, whatever. Everybody does that, right? I mean, that's sure, everybody, right? So those things are kind of like, meh, they don't work so well for you either. But I do think that your ability to In so many settings, your ability to describe yourself in a meaningful way matters, and probably never more than in an interview. And if you take this little tiny outline that I have and begin to, work with it, I think you'll come up with something that kind of rolls off your tongue and is really crystal clear. And, if you happen to meet me in a restaurant, or, you're walking by and I'm having lunch with someone, and I happen to know that you're in, let's just say that you've got IT certifications and you're in career transition. If I say, hey, Sally, come here, I want you to meet someone, and I introduce you to someone who, and they're, the IT manager, said, tell them a little bit about yourself. This is what I want you to tell them. Well, I'm a network engineer and a certified IT professional. I've got these kinds of certifications. I really love to help busy IT departments and end users and the rest ensure that whatever it is you're going to do, right? Keep them productive, those kinds of things. And my skills include this one, that one, and the other one. And yeah, so if you understand how to present yourself well, there's one framework for it. And I think that this will serve you really well in all kinds of settings in an interview for sure. And then the other thing you might want to do is to, in getting to know yourself before your interview, is to write down 3 or 5 success stories that are relevant to that particular role, so that you can give examples. And by the way, exercises that you did out of a book count. I mean, if that's the knowledge that you have, then use that. And the idea that maybe the knowledge that you have or the skill that you have or the experience you have isn't enough, well, I mean, the truth is, when you're in an interview, there's nothing you can do to change that. And so you may as well play that card, right? Just know how you're going to play that particular card. And whatever those success stories are, particularly relevant to either the job description or something that's in the job description, or maybe what you've imagined about the role when you were figuring out what the problems were, have some stories about where you've done some things that are relevant to the conversation that you're going to be having with this person in an interview. So that way, when they ask you a question, hey, what do you think about this? You can respond with, hey, well, let me give you an example. And you've already thought some of those through. All right. Okay, cool. Item 2.5, how to respond to likely questions. So here's the thing. You can go online and you can make yourself crazy by answering these 100 top interview questions or what have you. So, I feel free, right? I mean, feel free and go do that. And I'm sure that there's some help in it. Particularly if it makes you more comfortable. I mean, the most important thing is that you can kind of go, but I think you can make yourself crazy with all of that because you have no idea what conversation it's going to be. And I've been in so many interviews with so many different hiring managers and even and other interviewers, and even what they talk about from one interview to the other isn't the same. So here's what I suggest is that know more in general how you're going to respond to and how you're going to answer questions and how you're going to engage with the other person. So here's some guidelines for you. One is 2-minute answers or really feel good. And psychologists have studied this. What it comes down to is that if your response, particularly to an open-ended type question, is much less than about a minute, then the person who you're speaking to has the feeling that you didn't give it due consideration. And so that'll be a challenge for some of you who are a little more shy or whatever it is, or not big conversationalists. But know that it's important that you understand what 30 seconds feels like or what 45 seconds feels like. Get closer to a minute if you can. And it's not an exact minute, right? But my point is that I have interviews, and in fact, one of the candidates who's moving for a role right now, one of my concerns is that he's very shy and he's very quiet and responds with like 2 and 3 word answers. And the feedback from the team is that that's kind of awkward. And so it just comes down to, if your answer is 30 seconds to a minute long, that's enough to make someone feel like you really considered their question. And then going much beyond 2 minutes, you really start to get boring. So 2-minute answers is kind of a good space. 1 to 2 minute answers, really. So know what 1 to 2 minutes feels like and do that. Item number 2 there says that the answer to every question is about the problem, your ability to solve the problem. And it's not about personal characteristics, but refer instead kind of to your talent brand. So, when somebody poses a question, you can say, well, as a certified IT professional, I mean, I don't do that too many times, but, as of this, I've learned these kinds of things this way. And you can, talk about your ability to solve the problem, talk about not just the ability to do the work, but why it often matters. Yeah, sure. And let's talk about, I'm happy to talk to you about Active Directory. The truth of the matter is that, I really understand the structure. It's structured like this, and these are the key components of Active Directory. And let me back up. Maybe the idea, and this is just going to give you a simple example, is that when somebody says, so tell me about the experience you have with Active Directory. And let's just say that it's something you might feel like kind of going, well, I don't really have much experience. All I'm telling you is that that doesn't necessarily serve you well. And it's not necessarily being fair to the other person as well, because not a lot of experience is relative. I mean, what does that mean? So for one of my clients right now, a little experience with Active Directory means that they've probably set up thousands of records in multiple departments. And for some other companies, that would be a lot of experience because they never have to do that. So it's all relevant. So my point is that if you go back to your talent brand and if you go back and you actually tell a story, then things can work really well for you. So if I just follow that one through, so tell me about your Active Directory experience, and be like, oh, definitely wouldn't start off with, I don't have much experience, because you just made that person go, Instead, I could say, hey, Active Directory, it's really interesting. I see the value to an organization. In fact, it's structured like this, and I have a pretty deep understanding of that. The tool set to work with Active Directory is this kind of thing, this kind of thing, and this kind of thing. It's usually done when companies are bringing in new people. Is that right? Someone's setting up some new users, and we'll be setting up new departments too. I'm just curious, right? And so now what's happening is I'm beginning to have this conversation with somebody about that. And I can even wrap it up with, hey, in my classes and in our certifications and those kinds of things, I've touched that tool, or I've done these things, or I understand this record. So what you're doing is that when somebody asks you about experience related to something, they want to know how much risk they're taking on with respect to giving you the opportunity to go do that. And when you don't have a whole lot of experience in actually doing it that you could point to, a great thing is to get your understanding of it out on the table, and more or less try to teach them a little bit of something about it in 1 to 2 minutes. And item number 3 there says pattern for a great answer is, so the pattern, I think, of this answer and how you get there is you give what I call an introductory answer. And once you've given the introductory answer, then you're going to illustrate that with some stories. Let me give you an example of. And then what's going to happen is that know that question and answer is a, it's a conversation, and that you can give them cues to kind of hand the conversation back to the person. So what I mean by the introductory of this is that, hey, so tell me about your Active Directory experience. Oh, Active Directory is a really cool tool. It's certainly, able to help organizations do these kinds of things and have user logins and those kinds of things. So, hey, would it be all right if I, tell you a little bit about what I learned about this and getting the certifications? Would that be all right? And somebody's going to say, well, yeah, of course. So that was the introductory answer. Right? Yeah, Active Directory, this kind of thing. Now, sometimes after, somebody says, hey, do you have experience, with red widgets, whatever those are? Sometimes the answer is, yeah, I do have experience with red widgets, man. Let me give you an example. So the introductory answer is essentially parroting back to them. It's a funny thing. There have been so many studies around this, and one of the most obvious ones is with respect to waiters and people, servers in restaurants, that the ones who echo the order, there's the ones who they tried this experiment where someone would say, oh, that's an excellent order, or that's a really good thing, and kind of complimenting the person on that, versus the other servers who would simply say, prime rib, medium rare, they can just repeat the order back to them. Their tips were significantly higher. So what people kind of like is a little bit of parroting back, which is, that's what the introductory answer is. When you ask me if I have experience with Active Directory, I'm going to respond with, oh, experience with Active Directory. I just kind of gave you your same words back, and then I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. And then The other funny thing is that when you get other people to engage with you, they like you more, which is like, hey, would it be all right if I give you an example? Could I tell you, let me tell you something, let me tell you about what I, how I studied for my certifications. Would that be all right? People, of course, are going to go, yes. And then you go on about that. And then the way you wrap up a question and answer is, does that answer your question? And you can hand it right back to them. Or, how do you guys use Active Directory? So some way to let the person know that you're through and to really close it and to hand them the ball back. And a great way to hand the ball back is with a follow-on question. Does that answer your question? Is the most simple one. Would you like to know anything more about that? How do you guys use that here? So some way of doing that. So hopefully that makes sense. There's just a few that we'll talk about just to highlight a couple of examples. But the point is that we could go on forever with what all the question and the dialogue might be, and we could never even approach all of the stuff. So we'll just go through a couple of examples. So tell me about yourself. That one really comes back to your Talent Brand statement that we had earlier. I'm a this and a that with this kind of thing that makes me unique. I help these kinds of companies or these kinds of teams or these kinds of whatever solve these kinds of problems. Skills to do that include this, that, and the other, right? So that's it. Why should we hire you? Same thing. It goes back to, well, the reason why you should hire me is because I'm a certified IT professional. I know how to help these kinds of things. I understand that the impact that I make is this kind of stuff, and the skill and experience that I have are these kinds of things. Right, so it's essentially the same. I think the reason why I put why should we hire you on this list is that far too often I see professionals and see individuals who almost shoot themselves in the foot by talking about other people and doing some kind of comparison. Well, you won't find anybody else who's going to work harder than me. You don't even know who else I'm talking to. Really? I don't know. Why should we hire you? Well, I work so hard and I do all these things, and you want somebody to find somebody stronger. So anytime you're kind of backing out and you're describing yourself kind of third party-ish, like what you're like or what somebody else might be like, just put that in your back pocket. It probably doesn't serve you well, and just know that the best way to present yourself to the other person is in the context of the results that you create, the problems you solve, including the problems you solve for that individual, so that their life as the manager is better than it was before, that you're going to be easy to work with and the rest. So that's what I think about why should we hire you. A couple of others here we'll do, and then we'll move on to a couple of other things. So what are your greatest strengths? What are your greatest weaknesses? This one's still so common out there. Greatest strengths is easy to respond to. Greatest weakness, here's the thing that don't do on greatest weakness. The most common response I get, and I don't ask this, but other people do, so I hear it from hiring managers and other interviewers quite a bit, is people want to take something that's truly a strength and try to present it as a weakness. Oh, well, I work so hard and I work so many hours that my significant other, tells me that all of that. But I'm kind of going, yeah, right. Awesome. So maybe that's true, maybe it's not true. But anytime it feels like you might be taking something that's actually a strength and trying to spin it into a weakness, everybody you see through that, right? When people do it, you see through it. So everybody else does too. So my suggestion to you, if anybody wants to talk to you about greatest weakness, or they want to talk to you about, where you need some support, be really, really clearly honest about it. So mine is that I think that I can get away with not writing things down. I think that I can remember everything from every conversation and do it all at the end of the day. And the truth of the matter is I can't. And so I'm not naturally all that organized. And in fact, at the beginning of this call, I asked someone who was on this call to send me a note so that I won't forget about something, because I didn't have it to write it down. So I think that I'll remember all this stuff. So my greatest weakness is that with regard to recruiting kinds of things, in recruiting, you have to have a lot of balls in the air all at the same time. You got to juggle a lot of communications and the rest. And if I don't write things down, then I really will fail at that. So what I do about that is I have this backup, I have this notebook, I do this kind of thing. So my point is that if anybody wants to talk to you about greatest weaknesses or areas of improvement, pick something that's really real, that's material to the job, and talk to them about why you have what you've done to overcome it. So like I said, this list could go on. This is just a few of them that I picked out along the way. I think it's less about, um, it's less about any specific question than it is about in general about how you're going to answer that. But if you have any particular ones that you run into or you'd like me to address, I'm happy to do that. Just kind of type it over in there. I'm pointing over there because there it is on my screen. But you got the same thing. Put it in over there, and we'll happily try to address any of the kinds of questions that you'd like to. All right. Let's see. Another thing you can do is when this item number 4 here is when you don't know the answer, give an example of how you found answers to problems in the past. That's another great way. Most people understand that you don't know everything. And another great way to answer something, hey, tell me about Active Directory and all that. The answer sometimes is, well, or maybe some particular aspect of Active Directory. The answer is, well, I have never run into that before. I've read a little bit about it, but hey, would it be all right? How about, let me just tell you how I would approach that, because there are other things I'm going to run into that I've never done before either. So here's what I would do. And now you kind of come up with how you would approach the answer. I mean, mine would be something along the lines of, first I check to see whether there's anything in any of our books or policies or guidelines or whatever that it just hadn't run, so that maybe we already have answers to that. If I'm not sure, I'm going to go do some research. Google is my friend, and I'll do that. If it's really important, I probably won't execute until I run, these choices by what I discovered, maybe the preferred choice by either coworker. So whatever it is, like be able to tell a story about how you would go about solving a problem, if, for something that you've never really done before. Your only other alternative, and this is just not a great alternative, your other alternative is to tell people, well, I really don't have much experience in that. That's the truth, but it doesn't necessarily serve you or anyone else well. And it's not like everybody needs to expect that you know everything. And as long as you're dedicated and you can find the answer to something quickly enough, then you're doing everybody. I spent a lot of years with a lot. I know a lot of people who are consultants. They read the book on the airplane, and the truth is, it's not about knowing the answer now. It's always about your ability to figure things out and move forward. So there's always a way in an interview to not say, oh, well, I don't have experience with that. Oh, okay, you don't, but you gotta talk about something about what you would do or how you would approach it or what have you. I don't have experience with, or I don't know, that is not gonna serve you well. And some people will say, well, I just want to be honest with them. It's like, well, my ability to figure it out is honest too. Because here's the deal. What they don't want is that in an actual work setting, if you're going to run into barriers easily and you're going to say, oh, well, I didn't know how to do it, so I stopped. That's the impression that they're going to get in your interview. So solve the problem, right? Go answer the question. All right, item 2.6. This one's really important. Not that all of them aren't important, but this one's really important, which is to prepare insightful questions. At some point in the interview process, it's going to be your turn to talk and to ask. It's always your turn, right? It really is. It's a conversation. But usually the structure is there's some point at which it really is your turn to talk and to ask and the rest. And so you want to ask really insightful questions, keeping in mind that your objective in the interview is to get to the next step. It's to get to the next interview, or it's to get to the job offer. That's your job in the interview, is to get to the next step. And remember, early on in this, my suggestion to you is that every word and phrase and thing that comes out of your mouth ought to be aimed at the kinds of things that's going to make someone want to work with you more, want to hire you more, want to move you forward more. And so all of those things that you're curious about, ask yourself prior to the interview is by asking this question, is that likely to make this person like me more? And all of the questions that are around the what's in it for me questions rarely make somebody like you more, and sometimes make them like you less. So what are the characteristics of great question? That's item number 2 here, characteristics of great questions. The characteristics of great questions are ones that show that you're interested in solving the problem, show that you're interested in the actual work, show that you're going to dig in during the interview. If you're not going to dig in during the interview, then I don't believe you're going to dig in when you're on the job. People who don't dig in, there's a phrase in the industry that I'm in, and particularly in the staffing end of it, it's called paycheck employee. And the idea of paycheck employers are the people who think that because they show up, that they just get paid, and they're not necessarily committed to really getting stuff done because they're there for the paycheck. And I'm not saying that the paycheck's bad. I mean, we all get paid. Well, maybe that's not totally true, at least not right now. But it shows your interest in the problem, not just your interest in getting hired. That shows your interest in getting things done, and the person who's making a decision in the interview is figuring out whether they're going to move you forward. So the characteristics of a great question is that it shows your interest in the problem, that it demonstrates your ability to solve the problem, and that you're interested in creating success, not just for yourself, but for the team and for the boss in the organization. If you do those things, then your questions are going to come across really great. So as an example, what are the things that I need to do to stand out and be successful in this role? If it's the person who's the boss or another team member, hey, besides just doing a great job at getting my job done, which I will do, what are the other things that I could do to help you in your role or help the team? I mean, what other value could I bring to the organization? And that one's one where I'm being so positive that I'm going to be great at solving the basic job that I want to go beyond that and support you and the team. So that's the style of the kinds of questions that make people go, okay, wow, this individual really does care. They really are motivated. They really are driven. And that's the kind of people who, that's the kind of behavior that people really want to hire. And it will serve you very well. So all of the questions you have about, well, what does this job pay? And what about benefits or what have you? Or another one that's coming is, oh, and I don't really have any questions. This is a life-changing event. You don't change jobs all that often. You're going to be working here with us and with me or this client or what have you. And you're not curious about anything. Okay. So that's not bad, but you just made yourself like most everybody else. So, so honestly, right? You see my energy? That's how I feel about it. And that's how other people feel about it. And I make decisions every single day with respect to who moves forward in the interview process and who doesn't move forward in the interview process. It's a burden that I don't necessarily enjoy, but it's a big deal. So asking great questions makes a huge difference. So your first question should be about how you can contribute, how you can create success, all those kinds of things. If there's time, my suggestion, item number 4, is that your next questions be about the interviewer, right? There's nothing that people on the average, and most of us don't believe that what I'm about to say is true about us, but it must be. People's favorite topic is themselves. That it feels good, right, to exist, right, to be seen, to be noticed. I mean, it feels good. Everybody enjoys that, even someone who's crabby. I mean, they still enjoy that. So your next questions need to be about the interviewer. Get them to talk about what they like, what have they learned, right? So hey, I'm just curious. You've been here for about 4 years or so. Like, see, now I've researched you a little bit. You've been here for about 4 some odd years or whatever it is. I mean, what are some of the greatest successes you've had while you've been here? What are some of the things that that motivate you when you get out of bed every morning to come to work? It could be that you get somebody to drop their guard and they say, right, and all of a sudden you see somebody who's like they got real issues, which kind of got to make you wonder a little bit. But my point is that if you go ask about them, then you can, they'll like you more, and you can discover something about the team that you're going to work with. Item number 5, which is the what's in it for me question, should be deferred to later. Vacation, pay, benefits, those kinds of things can wait. Sometimes I reach out to people even prior to an interview, say, hey, I'd love to talk to you about this opportunity, and they respond with a email message that just says, what's it pay? And my reaction as I put that message into the trash can is, it doesn't pay you anything. So those kinds of things don't come across so well. 2.7, let me type a couple of loose ends and then we're going to change gears a little bit because this is all about preparing, right? And we got how to perform during the interview, which by the way, if you prepared, you're going to perform well in the interview. I mean, we could even skip the entire conversation about what to do. We won't, but if you're properly prepared, everything else is just going to flow from that. And I would say that less than 2% of the candidates who I interview are properly prepared for the interview they have with me. And probably less than half of them are properly prepared for the next interviews that they move forward after me because they didn't do their homework. But it makes a big difference. So to top a few loose ends, please dress appropriately. Have your clothes clean, right? I'm half kidding, but you'd be surprised. Mid-drift showing, man, not so much. No cologne is a really good idea. Can't tell you how many times people have said, man, I could still smell them after I left my office. Didn't go so well for you, right? So easiest way to find out what to dress is I commonly have people ask me, what do they, and I'll give them that advice. Dress one step better than the way you're going to dress on the job. So, and if there's no other way to do it, then a day or two before your on-site interview, if that's what you're doing, drive over at a time when people are getting to work or leaving work if you can, or get somebody else to do it and go see what people wear, literally. Know how to get there. So, and I think that the idea is that if you're not in the parking lot at least 20 minutes before your interview, you probably ought to consider yourself late. Here's the reason why it matters so much is I make my living because people get hired. And when I find out that you were late to the interview, my chances of getting paid just got cut at least in half, probably more than that. It's pretty much over now. There better be a really good reason why, and take pictures of the flat tire that you had. So get to the parking lot 20 minutes earlier. It's late. Drive there the day before. I can't tell you how many times people get to a place and it's a campus and there are multiple buildings and they're late to the interview. And if you're late to the interview, you almost might as well write it off. So be there 20 minutes early. Don't go in until 5 minutes before the interview because now you're a burden because the person you're interviewing with is in a meeting and somebody calls them and they say, hey, Sally, your interview is here. And Sally's like, what? They weren't supposed to be here for another 20 minutes or so. So chill in your car until, you want to go check in about 5 minutes before your interview. These things seem little, right? The reason why they're not little is I hear it. I hear it from the other end. I mean, people remembered that. They made an impression, right? It made an impression. You don't want to make one of those impressions, so don't do it. Have the phone number and the cell phone number for your recruiter or the coordinator or whoever set it up. So in the event that something is going wrong, please be the person who calls 30 minutes in advance that you're going to be late. Be the person who called to let them know you were going to be late rather than the person who is late. So, but it is that important. Hey, Kelly, we got anything to talk about before we move on over to this perform thing? Okay, cool.
We do. We have a lot of great questions coming through.
Okay, cool.
One question that came through, and you were touching upon this with the different questions about personal and how you would answer those. This one is sometimes an interviewer asks about hobbies. How would you go about answering this question? Do you have any tips on that?
Tell them what your hobbies are. Let me be not quite so flip. So I think that what it all comes down to is that people are trying to find out a couple of things about you. One is they're really trying to reduce their risk with respect to whether or not you can do the work. That's one thing they're trying to do. And the other thing they're trying to do is to figure out whether or not they want to be around you a lot and work with you a lot. So that question kind of straddles both of those kinds of things. I think that in an ideal world, you might actually try to either have a hobby or tie something back to the work that you do. There's an easy way to do that would be, hey, well, while I'm, looking forward to making this move in my career, my current hobby is reading everything that I get my hands on with respect to these kinds of things and doing those kinds of things and learning these kinds of things. And I'm not kidding, right? I mean, don't make that up. You probably ought to be getting ahead of it. So, hey, that's my current hobby. If you have one, that's the closer your hobby is tied to the work, the better off you are. So as an example, And hobby is relative, right? It might be something you don't do all that often, but so try to pick something that's relevant to the work that you're going to do. More mechanical things or more related to IT things if that's what you're doing. And so, and a little bit of human interest. So, I mean, that's a pretty innocent question, and I think it's a real opportunity. You could actually do both. You could say, well, here's my real answer. If you can possibly come up with two answers, and you say, well, relative to the role that I'm talking about, you may not use those words, but it's reading, it's learning, it's doing these kinds of things, and specifically if you name, I most recently read this thing, or most recently did that thing, or working on that kind of thing, or set up this own server, or whatever it was that you're doing, then that would be great. And you can say, on a more personal note, these are the kinds of things, right, that I love to do. So I think that would be great if you kind of pick both of those.
All right. And this next one is asking, this is a great question too. What happens if you are already part of a company and are in a promotional interview? How is this strategy of questions different that you would ask about the company since you're already part of it?
You know what? I probably wouldn't ask so much about the company if I was already part of it. I mean, that would just make you look silly. But I think that depending upon how well you know those other team members, in fact, you may not know them even as well as you do. I still think the ones about, hey, I'm just curious, what has been most successful for you? What about other people who have been in this role? What's most successful? And what are the things that I need to do to stand out? So, I think that I would focus on those kinds of things a lot more in my conversation than the generic stuff. Although, it depends upon the size of the company and the rest, that you still might know more about if you did this homework, you still might know more about the company and the products and stuff like that than they do, and they would still go over pretty well. So I think I'd probably take a really pretty similar approach, and I would try to make it feel like that it isn't, that I'm not taking it casually, that I think you might be best really taking it as just like you would any other interview. I'm actually involved in that a lot of times, though. Clients of mine will want everyone to have gone through the same process, and it's not that unusual that someone who's a current employee looking for a promotion actually runs through the same process and has conversations with me. And I often know these companies well, and sometimes they know me because I'm their virtual director of recruiting. So what works best is if somebody just treats it like I treat it like any other interview. If you just treat it like any other interview, then I think it can't go wrong. How about that?
All right. And another question we had related to the questions, how would you answer, where do you see yourself in 5 years? What are some good tips on answering that question?
So my first tip is actually have a clue what it is you're trying to achieve. So I'm not here to sell other, they're not for sale, they're free. But we do one that's called Keys to Career Advancement. And a big part of that is setting what your career goals are. And so the truth of the matter is that regardless of where you do see yourself in 5 years, most people don't have a clear answer to the question. And so just by being the person who has a clear answer to the question, you set yourself apart. So I think that the answer is be, really clear in that. So the thing that also is generally going to make you more attractive is that, and we go over this in that class, Keys to Career Advancement as well, which is the less interesting answer or the less interesting conversation is one where people are wanting to rise through the ranks and become a manager. That's not a bad conversation to have, but the better in general conversation where I see myself in 5 years is being better and better at doing these kinds of things, solving these kinds of problems, adding more value, taking on more tools, taking on more responsibility, and mastering what it is that we do. Along the way, if I can support others to be successful, those kinds of things. So I think that in general, your goal to grow as a professional in the type of work that you do is a really interesting conversation to have, because the truth is that you don't rise through the ranks in any other way unless you do those things. So I think it's great I think that's a great way to answer that. Then get all the way back at some point and you probably really ought to have some goals as to where you want to be and what you're trying to achieve in 5 years. My final thing about that is that if you have some goals and some things you want to achieve that the other person isn't going to find favorable, then you may not want to tell them about it. So as an example, I'm working with a candidate right now who he he wants to leave Austin and live. Somebody likes Austin, but he and his wife want to live somewhere else, and they don't want to be here more than about 2 years, which is a long time in a role, particularly for some of these kinds of roles, senior software developer. And he's making it important and putting it in all these conversations that, hey, and I just let you know that my wife and I are planning on leaving in a couple of years. It's become a deal. It's the reason why he's probably not going to move forward in this job. And the truth of the matter is that may or may not happen, and he's going to be here at least 2 years and those kinds of things. So anyway, that's kind of rambling. But what do you think? Does that answer the question, Kelly? The first part of what it was I had to say?
Yeah, I think that's great.
Okay. All right, cool. What else you got?
And let's do one more before we move on. So this one is the person wants to know what types of questions you suggest asking the person that's interviewing you to make sure that the team is a good fit for you. So you want to make sure you fit in with their team. What types of questions would you ask them
Sure.
in the interview?
Yeah. So I think that where I really start is that if I can get the other person to talk about themselves, then a lot of guard comes down and people will become a lot more open and honest about that. So I think that my strategy as a recruiter, when I'm trying to get people to open up to me about things like that, is really to say, hey, so you've been here about 4 years or so. Tell me about your experience since you've been here. What teams have you been on? Who you've been working with? I'm just curious, right? So what can you tell me about, what are some of the successes that other people have had? Where have they moved on to? What do people in general seem to like most about working here? And what's going to happen is that when you put it in that context, either someone would have to be pathological with respect to their ability to say, no, it's great, I love it here, and all this kind of stuff, when they don't. So if you can just get them talking about their role in the company and their experiences so far and the people who have been working with them and where have other people gone from there and what have you seen as some successes and what are the characteristics of the people who are most successful here, what are the characteristics of the people who don't do so well here, and put it in terms of kind of performance, not necessarily personal kinds of things. The personal stuff will begin to come out. So know how long they've been there, talk about the role, talk about their successes, talk about the teams, talk about what other people are being successful, where people go, things like that. And I think that you'll get a really good sense in it without the other person being guarded. That's what I think. So I always kind of take an angle. And of course, I've been doing this a lot, so it takes a little bit of practice, but I always kind of take an angle where I'll get you to talk about one thing, especially, and I'll feel what you think about the organization. So that's what I think about that.
All right, let's go ahead and move forward. And then we've got some more questions, but I'd like to keep them till towards the end in case you touch upon it later on.
Okay, cool. So this section in the perform during your interview actually is really easy, and it goes pretty quick. So the thing is that I really do believe that if you're properly prepared and you understand that the interview is not about you, and go into the interview not with the idea of I'm going into this interview to get a job, but go into this interview with the idea of I'm going to go see whether I can help these people, then the funny thing about that is the likelihood of you getting the job is actually going to go up by taking your focus off of that. And if you're properly prepared, I kind of don't have to tell you anything else. That's it. Be yourself. And actually, my advice to people is to go have some fun with it. Go have some fun. And I get it that depending upon your situation, if the thing you're worried about is how do you make your mortgage payment or your rent payment, I'm not saying that they're in pressure, but I am just saying that if you can take that off and regardless go in with that kind of an attitude, things are going to go a whole lot better. So in the green room, I'm not going to read all that stuff to you, but here's the deal. If you wrote down a lot of this stuff, if you wrote about the company, when you're sitting in the parking lot 20 minutes before, review your notes and just kind of go over things, relax, visualize it, and know what it is you're going to do. Go into it. Remember that you're a problem solver, not a job seeker, right? You're a problem solver. Go see if you can help these people. Remember that first impressions really do matter. Small talk is part of the interview. In fact, I've worked with plenty of organizations, and if they'll let me, we often include the receptionist or whoever the first people are, greet people in the interview process. The candidate doesn't necessarily know it, but how did they behave? How did they treat you? What was this? We even have them sometimes involved in asking some questions or setting up a certain conversation. So, and it's amazing to me how many people change their attitude when they think the interview has started versus, so assume that the interview starts from the moment you pull in the parking lot and like wash the dirt off your car, right? I mean, literally. Should that be part of it? It shouldn't be part of the interview process. Heck, I didn't mean for it to be. I just looked out of the window. I saw this filthy vehicle pull in. I saw this person get out, and I'm kind of going, man. And the next thing you know, the person walks into my office for their interview. I mean, you know, those things happen. So from the moment you drive on till you leave, you're in the interview at that point in time. So how you greet people even makes a difference. Just be yourself, right? I mean, just be yourself. Be your most friendly self would be a really good idea. When you're in the interview, always shift back to focus on the problem. And the problem is, you know, the interview isn't about you. It's about the problem. So, you know, focus on that. You know, that's the problem. And I can visually tell you that what happens in an interview sometimes is that, you know, you're on one side of the table interviewing me, and I'm on the other side of the table. And my objective in the interview, and when interviews go really well, is that rather than being, you know, kind of across from one another, like we were at the beginning of the interview, but what ends up happening is we both shift and we both start talking about the problem. And so if during the course of the interview, the interviewer is looking less at you, and I don't necessarily mean literally, but figuratively, if by the end of the interview, you're together talking about your ability to solve the problem and talking about the real problem that they have and things about the team and the rest, then your interview went really, really, really well. So the thing I can tell you about that is that by focusing on the problem and by having the conversation with people and always taking it back to the problem and how you'll solve the problem, and even if somebody asks you about Active Directory, right, it's always the opportunity to take it back to the problem. So here's Active Directory, and here's the stuff, and here's the structure of it. And I told you the thing that I told you with, you know, when I don't have a whole lot of experience what I'm doing, here's how I would solve that problem. And now I can actually, you know, in this case, in terms of focusing on the problem, say, hey, you know, I saw that you guys have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 250 employees, and, you know, typical turnover, that means that, you know, you guys are probably hiring what, 50, 60 people a year, so maybe 6 people a month. So it looks like from an Active Directory perspective, it's probably reasonably stable, I would guess. Or are you guys kind of going under some, you know, real change in the organization? My point in this is that I'm there to talk about the problem, and every opportunity that I get, I'll take it beyond skill and I'll take it beyond task and try to have the conversation about the problem, so that by the end of the interview, myself and the interviewer are looking at, talking about, laughing about, if we were really lucky, about my ability to solve the problem. I know that when I get feedback from a hiring manager and from a candidate, if that experience just happened, I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get paid because somebody's going to get hired. That's kind of how important that is. So focus on the problem. That's the big deal. All of this stuff we've kind of talked about in one way, shape, or form. Respond to questions with results where you can. So, you know, 1 to 2 minute answers. So your objective is that for every question asked, you want to try to answer it with whatever results you can, any lessons learned that you've had along the way, you know, those kinds of things. Try to be results oriented, not necessarily task oriented. That's not always possible, but where you can, if it's something that you have real experience in, instead of just talking about the experience, talk about the results that were created and some of the problems that happened along the way, and tell stories. Tell stories where you can. And this stuff, I mean, I hesitate to do some of these things because I don't want to ask you too much. I mean, really what I ask you is, please be properly prepared and then go be yourself and be your most gracious self and be your most friendly self. But, you know, don't take all this stuff to heart too much, simply because some of this stuff is kind of a big ask. 3.5, ask insightful questions. I mean, we already prepared the insightful questions, so the time is going to come. On the table, and the most important ones to get on the table are the ones that are about, what do I need to do to be successful? What does the 30, 60, 90-day plan look like? What are other people successful in this role? What did they do? Yeah. 3.6, we could talk about this one for a long time with respect to how to talk about compensation. And I say I have there if it's brought up during the first interview. It doesn't really matter the first interview or not. Here's a few guidelines for what you can do with respect to conversations about compensation. So one is don't give a range and don't lowball. So, if I'm talking to you and I say, so, what guidance can you give me in terms of your expectations around compensation? And you say, $50,000 to $60,000 a year. I didn't hear 60, I heard 50. And not only did I hear 50, but I heard that you're not sure. And I'd probably go back to the hiring manager and say, probably upper 40s, right? Probably upper 40s is where we would probably close this deal because that's what you just told me. So there's no reason to give a range because nobody hears the top of the range. Oh, they said 50 to 60, so let's pay them more. Yeah, probably doesn't make so much sense. So if you're going to put a number out on the table, then how about 53? How about 57? And somebody might say 57. Why 57 in particular? And you're like, well, based upon market demand, those kinds of things, and what makes sense to me, 57 is a number that I'd feel really comfortable about, and I think it represents kind of the value that I feel that I could bring to your organization. Yeah, that's why. How about 58 then? You don't like 57? Let's make it 58. And now you might even get a laugh, right? So that'd be fun. Don't lowball. It makes it really awkward for me. It makes it awkward for everyone when I had conversations with people, and I have conversations with them multiple times about it through the interview process, and this is where the number needs to be. And now we're getting down to an offer. Oh, but I also have a 15% bonus, and I have these other kinds of things. And all of a sudden, I know as you lowballed, what's going to happen is that it's not going to get higher, and it's just going to get awkward. And so don't throw out a number that you wouldn't be okay with accepting, right? Just don't do that. So, and the biggest suggestion I have is that it's, preface said, it's not about, well, it depends, but it is kind of saying, hey, here's what I know, is that people tell me all the time, well, it depends. Well, I know it depends. Don't tell me that. But what's more important is it depends upon what matters to you. So if you know what matters to you and you got about having some real career goals, now you can say, well, clearly compensation is important because you get paid just like I get paid. And, we'd all like to make $1 million a year. However, I'm in career transition. This is my situation. These are the things that really matter to me. Who's the team that I'm going to be working with? What are the challenges we're going to have? What I'm going to learn along the way? Be honest about that. Those are the things that really matter to me. And I'm willing to trade off. I would likely accept a job that paid me less, but did those kinds of things, right? And then you could always wrap it up to say, as long as the compensation is somewhere around market value, I can't imagine that if this deal doesn't move forward, it won't be because we can't agree on compensation. So that's how I suggest that you go about that. The most important thing that I have to tell you on this particular slide, though, and in this part about performing during the interview, so we had all the preparation. That's really important. If you ignored everything I said after that, that'd be okay, except for this one, which is 3.7, which is close with next steps. Never leave the interview without knowing the next steps and without the contact information of the person who you're talking to. The contact information is best to get at the beginning of the interview. Hey, do you have a business card? Thanks. So I got it, right? And I'm probably on your LinkedIn. I'm probably connected with you. I probably have your contact information, but don't not have the person's contact information. Are you kidding me? So have their contact information, please. And to know the exact next steps. Sometimes people aren't going to give you the next steps because they don't necessarily know. And somewhere, though, in your interview process, if it were me, what I'd probably do is essentially say, hey, this is important. I want to follow up. So when should I expect to hear from you? Say, okay, great. So, well, in the next couple of weeks, whatever. Say, okay, cool. So if I haven't heard from anybody by the end of the day, like next Thursday, would it be all right if I touch base with you? And people will usually say, yeah. Sometimes they'll say, no, somebody will hear from you. Kind of going, all right. But at least ask most of the time, hey, if I hadn't heard from somebody about this, would it be all right if I follow up with you? And that way, when you follow up, you are not bugging them. Your follow-up starts with the whole idea of, hey, I promised you last week that I would reach out to you. So you're just fulfilling a promise that you made in that conversation. So the other thing I can tell you is that 3.7.2, Not how interested you are in the job, but how motivated you are to solve those problems. That's super helpful. So when people close an interview with me and they say, well, I'm really interested in this job, kind of going, okay, great. I'm glad you are. So that means you're going to be easier for me to hire. You're not going to be a whole lot challenging. In fact, I can probably negotiate your comp now. So, I mean, in the mind of a professional recruiter, that's all the stuff that you just told me. Your interest in the job, that's good. I'm glad you're interested in the job. If you weren't interested in it, I'd want to know why and see what I can do to get you kind of back into it. But the more important thing is a better way to close that is to say, you know what, the things that I've learned in this conversation include this one, this one, and this one. Those are really motivating to me, right? I think that I can learn these kinds of things. I think I can bring this kind of value to the table, and this kind of stuff and doing this kind of work would really energize me to be at my best. I mean, that's what you ought to talk about. Your interest in the job? Yeah, okay, whatever. It doesn't make me like you more. It doesn't make me like you less. You know, it's just me. It's just also random. So I kind of don't care about how interested you are in the job. I care like that other part of it, right? What is it that you're going to do? Why is it exciting to you? And we'll have some time for questions, I hope, and I'll happily stay a little bit later. But here's the deal with progress after the interview. It's right, super simple, which is you do want to follow up with people. You do want to send them a quote unquote thank you, but I would never send them a thank you, right? I really wouldn't. Two things I suggest you do. One is wait until the business day after your interview to do that, because the whole purpose of this, at least for me, is to become top of mind again. So if you interviewed with someone today, you're already top of mind and you just wasted your opportunity if you follow up with them today. Follow up with them tomorrow. Now, tomorrow is Saturday, so tomorrow work is Monday. And if you interview with somebody on Friday afternoon, I suggest you follow up with them on Monday afternoon. And when you follow up with them, don't just say, thank you, I appreciated your time. Like, add something of value. Hey, Bob, we interviewed last Friday. Really do appreciate your time. Hey, since our conversation, I learned this, or I've been thinking about this, or I did some new stuff, or here's an article that you might be interested in. I mean, give them something of value. Just you're sending a message saying thanks that checks the box. It's called, hey, they followed up with me. Awesome, cool. Take advantage of that. So one, wait a business day. And two, when you follow up with them, please give them something of value. Always define next steps. Always do your research. Always, always move the ball forward. And whoever told you this, their responsibility to get back to you. I think it is. Since you can't bank on that, then you take control of the situation and you make sure that you follow up with them and ask for their permission up front. So, hey, Kelly, that's what I got to say about that. I think that's the end of that. There's nothing more to say about that.
All right.
We can talk about for a few minutes.
Yeah, so we do have some questions coming through. Just want to remind everyone real quick before we get to those that I will be sending out a link to the session recording. You will receive that through GoToWebinar. So stay tuned for that email. I will also have the handout attached in there, and you will receive a certificate for attending today. So that's great. Also want to encourage you all to reach out to your local New Horizons representative, your education consultant. They can guide you on your career path. So if you have any further questions, please contact your local New Horizons. If you are not sure who that is, you can log on to our website at newhorizons.com and do a zip code search to find the center nearest you. So let's go ahead and get to those questions. First one I want to address, Gary, is this person says nearly all jobs require applicants to apply online. How would you expect us to be able to get around that wall and actually talk to the company's personnel department?
Well, first of all, I wouldn't necessarily suggest that you talk to their personnel department. It's about talking to the hiring manager because that's where it's really at. So here's the deal. So required to apply online is one thing. I'm not suggesting that you don't necessarily go apply. I said I wouldn't apply online. I might would sometimes, but here's the real answer. The real answer is that most hiring managers are really unsatisfied with the recruiting, their personnel department, their all that, and they wanted to hire somebody yesterday. And so if you can use LinkedIn to identify who the likely hiring managers are and some of the later stage recruiters, if they have them, then even when you see a job that's posted online and you apply for it online, I still suggest that you reach out to those individuals, you connect with them on LinkedIn. Once you're connected on LinkedIn, you'll have their contact information. And when you send them messages about that, the messages are probably a little bit less about, hey, I saw a job that was online, because that doesn't add any value to their life. They just are going to say, well, go to the end of the line, job seeker. As opposed to, you could certainly apply for it online, and you can reach out to the hiring manager, or the person who's likely to be the hiring manager, and say, hey, Sally, thanks so much for connecting with me on LinkedIn. I'm a network administrator and a certified, solve these kinds of problems using these kinds of things. And, I heard a rumor that you guys might be adding to your team. So that's what I would do. And that's how I get straight to the hiring manager. In fact, I get it, right? My job is to talk to people all the time. But here's the deal. Most hiring managers have never received a phone call from someone. So I would even go so far as picking up the phone if I knew who it was. And, when Sally answers the phone, say, hey, Sally, this is Sally so-and-so. Hey, my name's Gary O'Neill. That's a little too far. But my point is that you can either apply online and wait at the end of the line and hope that everybody in front of you fails, or you can take your fate into your own hands a little bit and go find some human beings so you can help reach out to them and try to start a conversation.
All right. And this next question is, this person's had an issue defining the type of problems that they can solve for a company. They have broad IT experience, but it's difficult for them to figure out how they're going to solve the company's problems.
It is hard, and it is kind of hard to visualize those kinds of things. I think it all really kind of comes down to, if you do some research on the company, research on the hiring manager and the team that's around them, you can generally get a feel for the kind of work that they're likely to be doing, and you can get a feel for the likelihood of the real challenges and the real business opportunity. You might be wrong, but being able to have a conversation about what you imagine is still more, and being wrong is still more powerful than not doing it at all. Because what happens is that while you're doing that, during the course of the interview, you can ask questions. Hey, you guys got salespeople out in the field talking to people about the cars, right? I mean, do they bring their own, do you provide them with cell phones? How does that work, right? And then somebody might say, no, we don't use handheld devices and stuff at all. Oh, wow. Okay, interesting. But you still got credit for doing that. So it's hard, but the point is give yourself a break, that it's not about trying to be accurate about it. It's about trying to be creative about it. So be creative, because that creativity will help you have a conversation.
All right, that's a great tip. And this next question is, do you have any tips when interviewing with a panel? Just things that you would want to keep in mind versus interviewing one-on-one?
Yeah, the number one thing I suggest you do on a panel is that there's a dominant person who's on the panel. And oftentimes it's the hiring manager, and oftentimes there are one or more people who are subservient, if you will, to that individual. Those people sometimes have a lot more influence than you think. So the number one rule, or I'm not big about rules, number one suggestion I have for you in a panel is call on, call out, and talk to the quietest person who's on the panel, because that person sometimes has a significant amount of influence as to, that's why they had them in the meeting at all. So make sure you addressed everyone. Make sure you look everyone in the eye. Make sure you use people's names. Well, I can't remember people's names. Well, okay, cool. Great conversation to have. Hey, tell you what, in this panel interview, would you mind? I'm just going to take a couple quick notes. I'm really bad with names, and people say, I am too. Okay, cool. So call them by name, look at them, make sure you have a meaningful conversation to the best of your ability with every single person on the panel, because otherwise you're going to do the same thing as everybody else, which is you're going to ignore everyone other than the dominant person. And behind the scenes, those two other people, or whoever they are, or it's not that they're going to have a bad impression of you if you don't. It's just that if you could see behind the scenes after the conversation, those times when somebody really did a great job of addressing everybody who's on the team, somehow magically they're the most liked. So that's what I can tell you about that.
That's great advice.
Yeah.
All right. And this question is, my most recent interviews, I felt that I did great and ended up not getting the position. When I requested feedback, I was told that I did have a great interview, and they see me working with the company, yet they have no other feedback. It's happened in a few interviews. What's your take on why interviewers wouldn't provide any feedback to me?
My number one take on that is that that's the truth. So just yesterday, I had to let an individual know that they did great. We'd love to have them on board the team. We really would. In fact, if we have a future opportunity, we really would. And if it weren't for the fact that this other person was in the interview process, we would have hired them. So, with regard to somebody, and that's what I told them, well, what advice do you have for me to do better? It's just, I know you do great, really. I mean, I don't have any advice for you. I mean, the idea is that, I mean, 3, 4, 5 people are going to make it to finalists, and one's going to get hired. So statistically, the other people who did well are going to not get hired. So I don't think you can read too much into that. The other thing that I can tell you is that over the years, so I'm going to go out on a limb just a little bit, but the media serves us what we ask to be served because they sell advertising, and when we give them our eyeballs, they serve to us what we want. The same thing in some sense. Here's what happens. So when people ask me for feedback and I get really honest with them about what happens is that people want to object. They want to tell me that it's not right. They want to, so all of a sudden what happens for recruiters and people who are involved in this is that probably, I don't know, 20 or 30% of people want to argue about it and it becomes really uncomfortable. And then about 1% of everybody goes psycho and goes and creates a real problem or even sues the company, right? So over the years, what we've been taught by candidates is that we can't really tell you much because we take a huge risk in doing it, both in terms of the time that it's going to consume of mine with that 20 or 30% of the people who are really inappropriate, or the lawsuit or that I'm going to have to contend with, or the calls to the CEO or whatever it is when 1% of the people are insane. So yeah, that's kind of the reason why. It's a high risk proposition, but the truth is that very often you did do really well. And it's not that somebody else did better, there's just something different. I mean, in this particular case, the other person makes less money. So yeah, so don't read too much into that.
All right. And when applying for an entry-level IT position and having a very basic skill set that you intend to grow on the job, how
Mhm.
do you add value?
Oh, wow. So that one's really great. So particularly if you're in career transition, then one of the ways you can add value is what are the other things in life experiences and work experiences that you have that set you apart from the people who don't have that. So there's always something that sets you apart. If there's absolutely nothing else that sets you apart, then it's your commitment, it's your work ethic, it's your drive, it's your interest, it's your wanting to help others be successful in their roles. I think that when people feel that from you, that you're going to do everything that it takes and you're going to go above and beyond and you're going to be committed, then those are the things that you can do. And clearly, if you're really entry level into some kinds of things, I mean, you're not going to get hired in really competitive situations for kind of higher level things. So it's also about picking the right kinds of organizations and the right kinds of roles. Because here's the thing, it's not about what you get paid. It's about knowing that the role that you're in is that you're worth more than you're paid. Because if you're not worth more than you're paid, then you get fired or laid off. So yeah, that's kind of what I think. There's always something you can do, and the one thing that you really can do is, hey, this is the kind of work that I'd love to do, even if I didn't get paid. I do want to get paid, but what really matters to me is my growth, my that, my support of my team, those kinds of things, and that's the way you handle that. It's not always going to work, but again, statistically, you'll get 1 in 5 jobs that you actually interview for, probably something like that, because that's how it works on my end. 1 in 5 people who make it to the final stage get hired. So I figure then average the other way works true, which is 1 in 5 jobs you enter for, you get to the final interview for, you'll get.
All right. And this is going to be the last question. I know we went over a bit, so I appreciate
Yeah,
everyone staying on.
me too.
Do you have any tips or suggestions on how to handle the long 4+ hour interviews?
Wow. Bring some protein bars. Um, you know, I think so. Here's my number one piece of advice with regard to that is that um, if it's frustrating to you and if it's troubling to you in any way, and people have asked you the same questions over and over and those kinds of things, then I think I got a delivery, by the way. Did y'all hear that? So the thing that I think is really important in that setting is, hey Kelly, this is really embarrassing. Ask me that again. My package getting delivered, like it's like one of those
No
moments. It's like
problem.
what the hell what was I talking about?
No problem. Do you have any suggestions on the 4+ hour long interviews?
Oh yeah, I do. So you're really insistent. So the really long interviews, it's about keeping your energy and being gracious the entire time through. Treating each new interview as like a fresh new interview. And even if people are asking you the same questions over and over and over and over, that you address those appropriately. I think where they don't go well most commonly is when I see that the hiring team is like, hey, they seem to be frustrated about having to meet so people, and they seem to be bothered about the fact that some of us are asking the same question. So it's the energy that you're going to give off, or the negative energy that you're going to give off in that regard, that'll do you more harm.
All right. Well, we can go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Gary, thank you so much. It's always great to have you on our sessions.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. See
All
you.
right. Thanks, everyone. Have a
Uh,
great day and go answer that door.
I will. Bye.
Bye, everyone.